This is another Badger Beer Brewery Report interview, I guess you can call it. Um, I'm Greg, and I am here with Trevor Easton from Wisconsin's only fully gluten-free brewery, Alt Brew. Thanks for joining me today, Trevor.
Nice to be with you, Greg.
Yeah. I was in for your 11th anniversary party about now. We're here in the early spring. I'm sorry, early summer portion of the 2025, and I was in. I visited All Brewing. A little background on me, y'all, real quick. As far as All Brewing goes, I was in All Brewing a couple times before the pandemic, I believe, and I haven't visited there until this spring in May for their 11th anniversary party. And it was fun. Actually, I got there really before the party. I was there earlier in the day, but I was able to, after I walked out, y'all, I was able to see Trevor and his wife outside. And we had a little conversation, and that set up this interview. So again, I want to thank Trevor for joining me. But also, Trevor, real quick, I went. How did you, first of all, people who know All Brewing, I'm pretty sure knows y'all's origin story because it's pretty inspirational and fun, I would say. But for those who don't know and aren't familiar with All Brew's origin story, can you give us a little quick recap of that, please?
Yeah, so I'm glad you got to meet my wife because that's kind of the instigator. She got diagnosed with celiac back in 2007, and we had just moved to into Chicago, and I was a home brewer before we moved, and I brought all the gear down, and I loved craft beer and just was, and she would we would brew batches on the weekend. And then she got diagnosed with celiac, and that kind of really hindered that hobby. I did one last batch before, and was just like, oh well, I'll just keep everything separate, and it was a disaster because the grain, I ground it in her kitchen, so grain dust got everywhere, and I, the beer, brewed up, and then I was cleaning, I think, until 1 o'clock in the morning, and I kind of was like, I guess homebrewing is just not for me anymore. This is just, it's not fun, and like I was just so worried I was going to get her sick, and I was just like, this isn't worth it. So I stopped homebrewing, and but I realized I missed it, and I was still dreaming about recipes and thinking about different equipment to set up, and I kind of just had this epiphany one day. It's like, well, why don't I just homebrew gluten-free beer? How hard can that be? And that kind of set off the whole rabbit hole of going down. And it was very challenging. One, just getting ingredients that one would work well, and that were also gluten free. And so this is like 2007. It was kind of it was hard to tell what stuff was gluten free, what wasn't. We kind of learned that a lot of yeast, you got to be real careful because the especially the liquid ones, that's a barley starter, and so there's all these like little things that we went through. Yeast nutrients you had to be careful with, like all these different and then even grains, like spelt is one, like, oh well, that's not wheat, barley, or rye, and oh but it is related to wheat. And so um just kind of went through and then the other major challenge was just trying to get it to taste good, because as a home brewer, I was used to making good beers. I'm a huge fan of craft beer. That was like one of the things we also saw kind of in the market. We were buying gluten-free beers, but they just, none of them had that sort of what I call kind of craft, something that was hoppy or something that was malty, getting different styles. They were very, it seemed like all of the offerings in the market were a very similar style. And it just wasn't kind of the fun, unique beers that I was wanting to enjoy at the time. So that's kind of how the initial, getting the idea came from. And I actually did wind up, writing a business plan around doing a small gluten-free brewery, and presented it sort of Shark Tank style when I was in business school. And one of the best parts about writing a business plan is if it doesn't work on paper, it's not going to work in real life. But this brewery had potential, and so we wound up moving back to Madison in 2012, and then that sort of started the journey of like trying to get the actual brewery up and running. So I'm happy to go in more detail, but let you if there's questions about the origin, I can answer those.
Nah, I mean, that sounds really excellent. One of the things that just caught me, hearing about it is that it seems like it seems like you and your wife, or you and your wife, yeah, went through almost wasn't it the the time where there was an awakening about gluten-free in our society, meaning, wow, people, there's a large amount of people who have this problem. It seems like y'all, not only beer wise, were on the front end of it. It seems like y'all were kind of, in that early push for, society wise, about gluten-free, right? Is my time table?
Yeah, um,
Yeah.
yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, and I think when we got started, so like I had been, you know, I got told a lot of people were like, "Hey, you should just do one gluten-free beer, but do all the other ones full gluten." And I'm like, yeah, but you don't really understand that the customers, the consumers are really trying to find this dedicated gluten-free facility type of, and they want it because there was so much confusion in the market that people were trying to do a gluten-free diet and they couldn't figure out what was, gluten-free, and things would be labeled gluten-free that weren't. And,
Mm-hmm.
and we, that was like one of the kind of main things that we were really unique with in starting is we're like, we are not going to do anything that has, just to eliminate the risk of cross contamination, of not doing like a beer, because like, so everything was 100% dedicated gluten free. And, some of that comes out of just pure necessity and not being able to, like, I'm not like a great market predictor. But my brother-in-law, he's got really, like my wife's family all has, except for her dad, some, level of gluten intolerance, and pretty much all of them. But her brother is really, really, and he's a great resource because he was studying to become a doctor and he's now a doctor now. But he will like just chase down, information. He will call companies. He will find out if there's any kind of, you know, because he gets such a severe reaction if there is gluten in it that like he will go and make sure. And so that has been really helpful. But it also kind of made it was like, well, if he can't drink the beer and my wife can't drink the beer, what's the point of making this if it's just going to be sort of partially? So
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
that really helped us also sort of cement the initial, like, hey, this is what we're about, and it is gluten free. And what we're, trying to do is like, we've gone through a lot of the, trouble of trying to figure out what ingredients work and don't, and then we kind of take that like burden off of the consumer where like they know and can trust. But that also
Cool.
we definitely, and to get sort of more than to your question of like kind of that rising wave, that sort of helped because when we started with House of Brews, that was the brewery we started in the back in a dedicated room. Um, Paige's wife was, she was kind of realizing she had gluten intolerance issues and was looking for those options. And, sort of like, it kind of like we were all of a sudden fit a niche that he was like, hey, you guys should come in and start doing this right away. And then that was, pretty early, because I know when we first started going to like beer fests and doing tastings, the number of times I heard gluten free is not for me was like, it was like all the time. It was like, and people like, so we sort of were like, hey, well, just try the beer, get it if you like it. But there was definitely, I could tell, and it was really more of like there was a couple of beer fests that like the Isthmus put on. There was an Oktoberfest one that I really could see all of a sudden, the whole mindset kind of changed because it used to be like, we would get, you know, a lot of people telling us like, oh, I don't need gluten free. I don't need gluten free. That's not, try it. And then all of a sudden it sort of seemed like just the amount of people that were either looking for something gluten free or just didn't care because like they had been around gluten free so much, but it wasn't such a um, negative in the market that
Mm-hmm.
was actually sort of encouraging because it's like we would go to beer fest, and it wasn't like we were a pariah there. It was we would start to see and more people really enjoying it. And I always think like the highest compliment too is like what I'm looking for, because I do not have celiac. Um, so I'm always drinking beers that are not gluten free, so that I know what they're supposed to taste like, and I enjoy a lot of them. And so like when other people in the beer industry or brewers or home brewers try our stuff that and enjoy it, and they're not they like it just because it's beer. That's, I think, one of the sort of my favorite kind of compliment.
Yeah. And I would suspect too that when you initially think about it, that it would just be a lot easier going back to the first part of the your answer here. It'd be a lot easier just to go all gluten free as opposed to just half and half. That just sounds like a mess, to be honest with you. Not a mess, but I think it's different when you're coming out with an established brand, for say, like my great example is Lakefront,
Yeah,
obviously, who makes regular beers all the time, and then they can introduce a gluten-free like they have with their grist, and for it to work, it'd just be a different thing to have. We got five, over here, and then the whole cross, contamination thing is a thing. I know a brewery here that I will not name. Here in Wisconsin, that used to make their sours in the same place that they made their regular beer. And I was always like, wait, how do you do that? And how does that work? Well, there
yeah,
was a lot of trial and error, and there was a lot of cross contamination going on until they were able to get two places, or you know what I mean, get a system. So
yeah.
I feel that, I understand that for sure. And I think we should, man, your last answer opened up so many questions that I had already. But so one of the things is, because you even talked about there, and we can just jump off of that. You talked about how early on there seemed to be a pushback from beer drinkers and the consumers on, why do I need to drink this, and why, what's the effect, I'm not gluten free, I don't, what am I here for? But so then that kind of leads me to what, really quick, what are some of the most common misconceptions that you've heard about gluten free beer, and how do you address that? And also, it's kind of the same question. It's almost like it probably almost feels like, Trevor, that you're educating the beer industry on some level about what is gluten-free, what isn't, and ultimately, we'll get to your beer here in a second. But yeah. How do you deal with those misconceptions? How did you deal with the misconceptions, or continue to? And then it turns into like an education process, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely, like, there is a lot of education that we do kind of in, like, especially in like our tap room, trying to like get, when people come in, letting them know like what ingredients we're using. And then, and then we still get some like really old school, criticisms from people where it's like, they're like, well, it's not beer because you don't follow the Heisenbolt. And I'm like, yeah, a lot of them don't, like, and they're still
Oh my goodness, who
considered,
does?
yeah, and it's still considered beer. And even not to criticize, but the Germans didn't even know yeast was a part of it for the first couple thousand years or a couple hundred years of that purity
Yes.
law. So like,
Yep.
I feel like we just holding to that one thing is and I think then the some of the other misconceptions that we get is just, especially on certain ingredients, that people think certain things are gluten free, or that we don't use some stuff, but even though they are gluten free. And especially around like oats are a real challenging one. Oats are are a gluten free ingredient, but a lot of times grown as a cover crop for wheat. So those ingredients, you got to be real careful with those. And then I think the other one that's like kind of the biggest challenge that we see, more on like the really mainstream, is that the gluten reduced versus gluten free. The
What?
gluten reduce is a enzyme derived process. Essentially, they use the Clarex or the chill haze reducer enzyme, which is it basically breaks up the protein chain, and then it can't test as it tests as it's gluten free or gluten reduced, because the test doesn't actually see doesn't see the gluten protein. But I know we got early on, we had the issue where we were on vacation, we found this gluten free beer, and wife is drinking it, but just having like kind of the gluten reaction, and we're like, what's going on here? And then her brother actually was like, oh no, you can't drink that one. That's a gluten reduced beer. And even though it said gluten free,
Mm,
on it, or it was in the gluten free aisle, and
hmm.
so that's been one that we've also been trying to, really, like, ours are all, all the ingredients, and then we test for gluten. If there's anything that we, on any ingredients that are suspect or we are worried about, even when we put, pulled in our 20-barrel brew system, we got that up and running. I mean, I did so many gluten tests on it just to make sure that every single a piece of equipment, even though we went through essentially a 12-stage process of tearing the equipment, down, washing, replacing any sort of soft gaskets, doing a full clean, sanitized cycle, passivation, repeat, and rinsing. And, I still wanted to make sure that, hey, if there is no chance that this has any remaining gluten in it. So,
Mm,
um,
mm.
so if that, yeah, so
Yeah.
that's, yeah, we're, trying to, the gluten free and gluten removed is also another sort of challenging one that, and you want to buy if you have celiac, or um, you want the gluten free. If you're just looking for like a low gluten diet, then the gluten removed probably is okay.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a great place to talk about alternative grains. I have a question for, but also what I would like to mix this question in with is I explained to the audience that I was at Alt Brewing um early early-ish on in y'all career. Y'all probably like two or three by then. And you were in your house, you were in your current home, which is over by METC. Y'all had graduated, I guess, out of the House of Brews,
Yeah.
which many other breweries did, including Mobcraft and
Yeah.
what's the I can't remember the bird one. They're out in
Dead
Milwaukee
bird.
now.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, that
Yeah.
bird. Yes, 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 yes. So one of many places that wonderful
Very.
shout out to the House of Brews and Page. Absolutely, absolutely. But so I explained this to Trevor when I talked to him a month or so ago, y'all. I was not impressed, even though I even went into it knowing that it was gluten free. There was still really no beers that grabbed me back then. Now, when I went to visit y'all a couple months ago when y'all had your 11th, I was blown away about how much I felt that y'all have grown, at least for me personally, in the taste of the beer. Now we're gonna get to before we get to the differences between gluten-free beer and regular beer, because there is differences, and we absolutely, I believe, have to acknowledge them, so that people have a great idea when they come into a gluten-free brewery. But can you elaborate on the like overall on the alternative grains that you use, but also though the evolution of these grains and of the selection of different stuff that y'all have at your expense that I don't believe you had the first time I was with you there a couple bunch of years ago, and how that has affected the quality of the taste of your beers, because in my opinion it clearly has.
That, but and I appreciate it, and I know it's nice to hear that, like, people are enjoying the improvements, because, like, usually I try to, we don't try to change recipes too much unless it is for a better, and like, we want it to make sure that, like, the person drinking it is always getting a better experience.
Mm-hmm.
And even over the last, like, couple, like, 5-6 years, the availability of good gluten-free grains has really improved. So that has been one of the probably biggest game changers, is that we were able to get better ingredient, or we had more ingredients available to us. And then we've started also walking away from some of the ingredients that we initially started with. So, like, sorghum was, essentially one of the few gluten-free grains that was available. But we always, and, like, and when we first started the, you know, the brewery, it was like sorghum was like one of, yeah, it was essentially that and rice syrup as available, um, for
Mm-hmm.
gluten-free grains, and the flavor profile of sorghum just wasn't always the best. And like we were always trying to do our best, so we do really low temperature, well, not super low, but like low 60s and really long fermentations to try to get that sort of secondary cleaning process, almost the alt beer style of, to try to clean up the beers and get them as bright, because like we were always really challenged with, it's like we're using these ingredients that people aren't always familiar with, and then it has to be as perfect, because if we have any other contamination issues with, like, bacteria or any faults in the beer, we're going to get hammered with it. So we have been progressing. Like, we did remove sorghum from all of our recipes, and we have found, like Rustic Badger, which is one that was one of our staples. It was our first beer, and then we actually had pulled it off because off the shelf, just because Hiking Boots was a newer beer that we developed, and like the you know people, the demand for it was way higher, and we ran out of capacity. But then we had a lot of people who really liked the Rustic Badger, and so we brewed it again as sort of a fun beer to bring back without the sorghum this time. And the color of it is different, but I think everyone that I've talked to, the actual overall taste of it is way improved, because you're not having to fight through this astringent profile to get like a really good flavor. And so like without the sorghum, the actual availability of the taste of the hops, and that one too, it's a really yeast centric beer. Like those come through and they shine a lot brighter. And then, like on the other side, with the availability of the different roasted grains or malted grains that are gluten free, that's helped. And I think too, we've kind of sort of leaned into like what hop profiles work well with gluten free. So like trying to make sure that like the hops are, balanced with the grains, and like kind of the different profiles that we're actually kind of that we see with what sort of naturally comes out of a gluten-free sort of base that we're working through.
Yeah. So are there any are I was gonna, you can wrap this. I have so many questions. I just got to wrap them in like,
Yeah.
like kind of combos. And you're a really good explainer. I could see how you've been really excellent as far as explaining this to folks who really, because it's just really, there's just so many different aspects of this than traditional brewing, even though the backbone is traditional brewing, if that makes sense. Are there any particular styles that you found that are especially challenging, or you won't do, or you just don't feel are that lines up, or is everything open and it's just you just have to if the ingredients come with it, if that makes sense, if the ingredients match? Where are you at with the particular styles? Anything you
um
recall?
well, you mean, just to go back, so one of the things when we first started, dark beers were really, really hard to do. Like, I tried so many different batches trying to get like a good dark beer, and what the grains or the ingredients that were available to us, it would always taste like burnt popcorn, and it's like that's not what you want. You want like a nice malty without that overall burnt profile. And sort of funny enough, we did a common thread beer with an Ale Asylum. Was uh, they were the ones that chose the style, and they wanted to do a Baltic porter. And so it was like, oh, okay, how are we going to do this? And and one of the kind of requirements is that all of the grains had to be malted. Like you couldn't do any like just pure sugar additions. So like the Belgian candy syrups and stuff like that we would have used for trying to get some darker profile, like were not available in this common thread brew, as sort of just like the kind of Iron Chef sort of requirements. And so we did this like whole different. It was actually kind of like doing sort of two independent mashes, because of just like the challenge with the grains of like for us on the gluten free side. And I totally, it's like one of these beers I did late at night, because I was trying to fit it into into the batch, when we didn't really have time. So I did it at night, and I totally screwed it up. I did it backwards. but then like all of a sudden, like, so it's like I had this whole recipe and then I screwed these two things up and just did them backwards. And I was like, but then it was like one of those perfect, I was like, oh my gosh, we got the dark color that we've never been able to really fully get and taste it. And I was like, oh, this isn't overly, it doesn't taste like burnt popcorn. It's got the nice, dark, rich, flavors we wanted. And so that was really, kind of like eye-opening, and like it was a lot of fun because it was like we finally were able to get into those darker styles that
Mhm.
had challenged us. And now I think too with like the different, there isn't really anything on the table we don't have limited ourselves from that I wouldn't be willing to like
Huh.
just try. Like we we're doing so the ALS has like a charity beer that where you buy the hops. It's where for these, and like then a part of your proceeds from the beer that you sell go back to the ALS. And for that one, like we're doing like a cold IPA, and it's just sort of like kind of an exciting sort of fun style too, because like I think the hardest thing that we have been limited really on our size is trying to do the lagers and the IPAs, or the lagers and the pilsners, and like the lighter colder fermenting styles. But now that we've got larger tanks with the ability to do the sort of cooler fermenting beers, we're starting to get real excited and trying to build more recipes around that too. So um, and
Yeah. No, do you have any more?
oh, and I was gonna say, and too, and like it's funny, we are like uh, sort of spring summer seasonal is a Hefeweiss beer, which is essentially based on a wheat beer, and it's like you get all of those like sort of almost like you get all the yeast really drives the profile on that one, so it smells and tastes a lot like Hefeweizen, but it doesn't have any wheat in it. So it's very enjoyable. So we're happy with that.
Yeah, yeah. And one of your flagships and one of your award-winning beers is a dark beer, right?
It is, yeah. So so Copperhead is the sort of a little darker than like a red, and that one that has a silver and a silver from the Great American Beer Fest and a bronze World Beer Cup. And then Porter has a silver from the Great American Beer Fest, and that Porter recipe is almost, it's not the exact same as the Baltic Porter recipe we had originally developed, but it's very like that kind of really opened the door for that one, for that recipe to even be available.
Mm,
That's how that recipe got started.
yeah, and if I remember, I had your porter, and it's really nice. And this is a great segue into um one of the things I noticed. I enjoyed really every beer that I have from y'all. It was really excellent. But one of the things that I did notice about it, and I'm not gonna, I'll save my opinion and I'll let you talk on it. Is just the difference between gluten-free beers and regular beers. I think overall there's a difference. And I think when you walk into a gluten-free brewery, y'all, or you have a gluten-free beer, I believe that there's a level that you have to understand that there's going to be differences in the beers. They're not going to be presented in the same manner. And that's a good thing, y'all, not a bad thing, because as you know, we have 10,000 breweries still, even with the recent closings. And there's a lot of recipes that are close, for lack of a better word. The more breweries you go to, the more likely you're going to find some beers that are the same. Trevor, can you speak to what you feel are kind of the main differences between if I had a flight of your beers and then I literally walked up the street, because you can walk from Alt Brewing to Carbon 4, and I had four of their beers, same style. What differences do you feel that I would get out of your beer that I would get at over Carbon 4, or vintage, or working draft or something like that?
Yeah, I know it's a very hard. That's a hard. It's a good question and challenging to sort of think about, because I know I do go and drink at and sample the beers and enjoy. and like what would be the difference. I know, some of it too, the base ingredients we use obviously are, different. Barley is essentially almost the perfect grain for making beer. So, and like that, that a lot of that profile is different. And like when we're using essentially mostly like millet, which has its own unique, sort of characteristics, and provides a lot, more of like kind of a, like that grape nut profile, which is good. So, and like I noticed, like probably the easiest way for me to maybe explain the question of, like what we do to try to get our beers, like what we lean into with the gluten free, a lot of times is, you know, that it sort of naturally comes out where you get a lot of those like sort of fruitier, kind of sometimes apple notes, sometimes, like the fruity notes that come through, that just sort of happens just the way the yeast likes to ferment out the grain, the sugar profile that's in it. And so, like, actually I think one of the best things for us was the juicy hazy IPA category. Like that style really almost like, if I was to sit down, was like where, some of like, the more traditional like bitter IPAs, like, it's hard for us to always pull some of that little bit of the sort of fruity aspect out of it, and that just leans right into it. So, now I don't, that we do try on all of our styles to have that, but that I know is sort of one where it was like, well, at least thankfully the style that's becoming wildly popular, if we lean into it the right way and then balance it out with the hops so that like you're getting all those profiles that you want in a, hazy IPA,
Mm-hmm.
then the consumer, isn't going to notice, or will notice that, wow, this actually is really, really good. And, we've had, I think a lot of people that do get to try our beer, and if it, they're, very, you know, happily, and some of them don't even know it's gluten free.
Yeah. I found this is just my perception, y'all, not
Yeah.
everybody. I found your beers to be lighter. I found them to be feeling lighter in my mouth. Feel maybe the mouth feels a little bit lighter. Feeling a little lighter in my gut. Um, just feeling a little bit lighter, and that's
Okay.
not a bad thing, y'all. That's especially I was in there in May, so it was like nice little spring day, and I just felt lighter on my toes after I drank your beers. I didn't feel anything. Again, the first time I was there, as opposed to the last time, I didn't feel anything missing flavor wise. Even in your IPAs, one of the things is, maybe we could talk about this real quick, not to get off on a big side tangent, but we can
Yeah.
if you want. Is the IPA. That was one of the ones where early on I heard that and this is early on, because I believe that gluten free, as we spoke here, but I believe it's so far advanced now than it was. But early on, I used to hear that IPAs were a struggle with gluten-free breweries, and I don't know, y'all had two on, y'all had a double, and y'all had I think a session, and they both were really excellent, and the hop profiles were nice, and I could just tell by just closing my eyes that they were IPAs, and drinking them, or not knowing, not trying to think that they were IPAs, but just having what was in my mouth to find what I was thinking. Yeah. So so I just found your beers generally lighter. I don't know if that's feedback that you heard from
Yeah.
folks.
And I appreciate the way you described it, because I feel like I've gotten, sometimes people will sort of hammer us on that, where it's like they don't like that they're, lighter, and a lot of our beers do finish a lot, sort of a lower finishing gravity,
Mm.
and so that's sort of, I mean, I appreciate the way, to hear that, so because I like a lighter, it's a cleaner, crisper
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
beer that doesn't kind of, and like I know exactly what you're talking about with like the sort of like the heavy gut feeling,
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
think is, really, it's great to hear. Um, And then, yeah, and then, I think too, I agree with you 100% on the gluten-free kind of IPA style that was out there. So like one thing that sort of annoyed me as a brewer and actually a craft beer, more of like on the craft beer enjoyer side, the
Hmm.
gluten-free market, is a lot of it like you'd see an IPA, but then like the IBUs and the ABV would be like, that's not an IPA. So
Mm,
I can get it where it's like, okay, you're doing an IPA style, but it's gluten-free, but it's like, but to me that sort of leaves the person who's trying to enjoy a gluten-free IPA kind of, they're not really even getting to try what one would taste like. And so, I know we've done you know I think, it's sort of like now the hop selections that we do, we're always trying to make sure that they're accentuating kind of our profile and not, working against it. So and we have like there's certain ones like sometimes like like Citra, we do have that. Like I know Citra is in the that uh double IPA, that the Holy Hop Grenade. Um, but like also like Amarillo is like the one that really drives that flavor, and like Citra is in
mm,
the Rip Jeans and Wolf Shirts, but it's not like an overbearing amount of Citra. It's like sort of like a note that's in there, so it gives it that nice. But like if we did like a pure Citra hop beer, it can be almost overwhelming. Just because like you don't have, it's like you get almost too much of that citrus juicy profile with it.
mm, mm, mm. So, I only got a few questions left. I want to
Yeah.
just again thank you for joining me this afternoon. But so what is this fascinates me too. Obviously it's hard to know a bottom line on this one, or to get to really specific on me. But who do you feel your primary customer base is? Is it just craft beer drinkers, or is it do you see a lot of non-gluten tolerant individuals? I mean, obviously, but who do you think your main person is that comes to your brew pub?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know, like I can the in general, we get a lot of people that come in, and especially it's really interesting from all over the Wisconsin and even down. We had someone from Minnesota just drive in. We had St. Louis. We get the Midwest and even further away, kind of at really any given time. It's in the tap room. And then I know the people that that really really like our beer, especially are like people who are craft beer drinkers and loved craft beer, and then get diagnosed with celiac or some kind of gluten intolerance, or looking need to move to a gluten free option.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they're the ones that they are the most appreciative and love the beer, and then I think they really are the best kind of brand ambassadors that we can have, because here's people that loved craft beer, and they've got a beer fridge. They want they have friends that are still into craft beer, and like hoppy beers, and like different styles, and like the malty, like it. They like to talk about beer, and they love being a part of it, and they'll bring their friends over, and like they've, it's like, oh, hey, try this. And now some of them, will start warning. They're like, hey, you can't drink all of my beer out of this fridge. Like or if they go to parties, because like
Mm-hmm.
people will see like, oh, they, especially like Rip Jeans and Wolf Shirts are double dry hop hazy IPA. That's a
Mm-hmm.
really, if you're into hops, that's a and especially if you like, sort of the throat scratcher type of, that one is really hits the mark. And then also like our hiking boots, which is a really light blonde ale, and really anybody, it doesn't matter that beer is gluten free at all. Like it's just it
Yeah.
tastes super nice.
Yeah.
If you're sitting outside,
Yeah.
uh, everybody can enjoy it. It is not, it's not, you're not going to be lacking anything from, from having that beer, in, the style it is, and the fact, it sort of just happens to be gluten free, but is
Right.
still very enjoyable.
Right. And I was gonna ask you about feedback, but I'm pretty sure, and I'll just set you up for this one, but you've already, I think you spoke on it a little bit. You must get a lot of rewarding feedback from people who can drink beer now that weren't able to, or weren't able to without a lot of discomfort.
Yes. Yeah, we do get it's really nice, like it, because in our, especially like the tap room, and I know I've gotten lots of very positive feedback, but sometimes people are nicer than they need to be to me, because and so it's really the a lot of the bartenders, when we've done like sort of been all sitting around kind of talking, and people are like, they love being a bartender at Alt Brew, because people come in, and like the number of times like people have been emotionally overjoyed with the fact that they're sometimes like sitting there with somebody having a beer, that on draft, or just having a beer, or being in an environment that was safe for everyone, and everybody could enjoy the beers, even the people are not gluten free enjoy them, the person that is. And I think I remember one. It was sort of one of my favorites that we had. It was two friends that would get together. I think they were like childhood friends, but they would like wind up meeting each up. If they were ever in cities near each other, uh, and they would always go to a brewery. But then one got diagnosed with celiac, and they would still go to breweries, and the one with celiac would just order a cider, or order wine, or whatever they could order. And the friend that didn't have celiac found out about Alt Brew, because they were like, oh, we're going to be in Madison, and they saw this, and they were like, I'm going to make them come here, and I'm not going to tell them that it's all gluten free. And so they came in, and this was kind of a, and so the friend was like, had was like, oh yeah, we'll meet at All Pro, great. But and they didn't know, or we're meeting, and they sit down, and the the friend is like, oh yeah, I'll get this, this beer, and then the one with celiac was like, oh, do you have a gluten free one? And like the bartender was like, yeah, which one? And the person was like, I need the gluten free. Like, do you have a gluten free beer? And they're like, yeah, which one? And it was like this like disconnect that you couldn't tell. And then the friend who had brought him was like just smiling. And finally, the bartender was like, they're all gluten free. It's a dedicated gluten free facility. And like the friend that had to like just looked over to, and they would it was a great kind of surprise. And then just the total enjoyment factor that this friend really, like, they kind of got a little emotional, was this, that they finally were
Yeah.
able to kind of recreate that experience of being able to sit at a bar with their friend and have a beer and just feel totally comfortable, and and happy that they were there, and able to do it.
Ah, that sounds great. That's a great story. Do you know the percentage of people that have celiac?
Yeah, so it's about a little less than 1%. Yeah, it's like
Oh,
1 in 113 people have
okay.
celiac. Is like sort of, but I know a lot more, that number is changing, because like
Fast,
there's a lot
probably.
more people that are realizing that they have some kind of
Right.
gluten,
Hmm.
celiac, or some other
Hmm.
um, thing that would want them to look for a gluten-free diet.
Yeah. It's still, I feel, newish on our plate as a society, if that makes sense. Pun intended too, by the way.
Yeah.
Um and that leads me to one of my last questions. But before I get to that, I just wanted to point out, y'all, that there are less than 20 fully gluten-free breweries in America. So that means one per every two state or something like that. Every two states, there's only one, y'all. So what Alt Brewing is doing here in Madison, Wisconsin is unique for sure. And I could see where Trevor just shared with us, y'all, that he has people, we have people coming from multi states and far away. We any Badger Report person knows that we embrace the beer tourism. We understand it. We are the beer tourists, but on some level too, y'all. I'm sure there's a aspect of celiacs being driven to come up here to Madison and to enjoy what Alt Brewing has been working for and working towards for damn near language, but damn near 12 years now. Any comments on that? What I just said, Trevor, before I get to my last comment?
Just a shameless plug that, I mean, I thought it was a perfect, so there actually is the Madison Gluten-Free Fest is
Let's
this
go.
Sunday, June
There we
8th
go.
at the Breeze Stevens. And so Alt Brew, we hosted the event last year outside of our brewery, but it actually was so successful that it actually needed to move to a larger venue. And they'll have Alt Brew there for sale too. So if you're looking for a good lots of different great gluten-free options, and all in one place, and that is a good thing to check out this Sunday, June 8th.
Yeah, and while we're here, y'all, please explain your distribution and where people can get y'all.
Yes, so our distribution, we self-distribute for like the Madison and Dane County area, and we're trying to get into as many places that make sense for us, and then we work with a distributor for the Milwaukee, Appleton, and Green Bay. So it's we're trying to get those pieces plugged in, but we really just last year was the first time we got our larger system, and it was at the end of October, really, of last year. Finally got the system up and running, so that allowed us to brew in quantities that are much more of a distributable level. Because like we were brewing on a essentially a 2-barrel system all the time, but you get about 20 cases and 2 kegs out of a 2-barrel batch. That's not enough beer to really have a great distribution network. So we're in the kind of early stages now of trying to expand our distribution around the state, and then hopefully trying to get it even further if we can.
Yeah. So I have a couple notes. Number one, y'all. I'm most breweries in the Madison area have Alt Brewing. I've noticed that. That was one of the things I noticed. They will either have it in a can, some will have it on tap, so you have that. Also, I know that Trevor's going to back me up on this one because I say this about other breweries or beers. If you're near our area, like in Madison and or even southern Wisconsin, and you don't see Alt Brewing there, please tell the folks that you would like to have an alternative here, and Alt Brewing's a good one. And maybe Trevor can work out the distribution on that. But a lot of times, y'all, some people are willing to give y'all what y'all need or what y'all want, but sometimes they just don't know that it's a need. So one of the things that y'all could do is spread the word. Say, hey, have y'all heard of Alt Brewing up in Madison? No. Okay, well, we can't get them down here in Illinois, but is there any options down here in Illinois? Or is there anything that y'all start speaking out, celiac, y'all start speaking out, and let people know that you're there. Do you have anything for that, Trevor?
Oh yeah, I mean, I absolutely. If especially if you're in Wisconsin, the Madison market, we are pretty good at servicing almost anybody here, and it's amazing how much we could go to a place 10 times saying, "Hey, you should carry Alt Brew," and if they have one customer that asks for it, that will be the difference. It is. Kind of and it's been fortunate, a lot of times, the ones where we have gone to places that have been, it's because they're like, oh yeah, we got customers asking multiple times a week if they carry you, and so we're glad you're here, and yeah, we'd like to carry you. So that really does help. And I know probably people, if you're looking for Alt Brew, asking your favorite store that you go to frequently, and even like places like Woodman's, if you ask the A lot of times the beer manager is one working the register or right behind the counter. They listen, and they're very it's a they like to bring in products that they know customers will buy. So it
Mhm.
makes our life as a brewer a lot easier, trying to get it out there into more markets.
Yeah, and even get specific, y'all. Even get specific. Say, hey, I don't see any gluten-free porters. Does all
Yeah.
have a porter? I mean, really, because again, I think a lot of times, people, especially, a lot of people in this industry are trying to make money. And they're trying to give people what they want, and that's how you make money, is giving people what they want. So if people continue to hear, oh, I like that alt porter that I had over at the thing, can y'all get this? Is this something that can be done? And then Trevor may not even think about distributing that one in a can. And if he hears enough feedback, he'll be like, man, maybe I need to put this porter in a can. Isn't that how it works, Trevor?
That is, yeah, that is. Yeah, because like our ripped jeans and wolf shirts, we were not gonna try to put it into a can, but then we were starting to get so much demand for it that it was like,
Yeah.
okay, we either brew this, every week on the 2 barrel system, and then that kind of starts limiting what we can do, in terms of like, different beers. So it was like, well, let's move that one to into a can. And actually, June 4th is the first time we're going to be canning that, just because our customers were like, hey, we want
Yeah.
this, we want to
Yeah.
take it, and we really, like the can format because it's more portable than the bottles had been. But we will still be bottling stuff, and but when trying to get it more, any of the larger disseminated beers into like the distribution side, the can works a lot better.
Yeah, and I think not to get all preachy here, but I think generally in society we get jaded by the big companies that don't hear us. And I'm telling y'all that small craft brewers hear you, and they want to hear you, and they want to stay in business, and they want to continue to, not only employ the people they employ, but they also want to continue to give y'all products that y'all enjoy, and they will hear you. Now, again, a big corporation, we're used to them not hearing us. So then I think that sometimes mutes us, Trevor, on the feedback that we give our small corporation or our small companies, if that makes sense. So I
Sure.
feel that I think we should talk to our small people, our small companies, like y'all, small businesses. And when we do, we'll get the results, really, really quick, especially if a bunch of us, if y'all find out that a bunch of us are feeling a certain way about a certain product, y'all are willing to deliver if y'all can. So on that note, Trevor, I'm going to let you go here. It's been a great conversation. I'm going to give you the last word on anything that we might have missed here, or anything about Alt Brew that I would like for you to recap and tell everybody else where to find you, where you at, and anything else of pertinence that you would like to express before we get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can find us 1808 Wright Street in Madison, Wisconsin. The tap room is open from 1 to 9 Thursday, Fridays, and Saturdays. You can also, our website, you can buy beers, especially if you're coming from out of town or a long distance. We try to keep the inventory of that up to date as much as we can, so that, if you wanted to buy something, and make sure you got it. If you purchase it online, we hold it for you, so that, it is available. But then, yeah, I mean, I think just in general, I'd love to, thank you guys for listening. I think the questions were fantastic, and I hope I didn't ramble too much, because I can see we've gone a little longer than the 30 minutes, but
Nah.
they were great to think about some of these things again that I haven't thought about in a while, and appreciate it, and really happy to be a part of the show.
Well, thanks, Trevor. Also, I would like to put a little bit more context in your where y'all at. They are right up the street from Carbon 4, y'all. So if you dip into Carbon 4 and you're looking for some some gluten-free options, they're really right up the street, and they're right under. I mean, y'all might as well be on the Madison College campus. Y'all are like
Yeah.
right there. You can't miss it. So if y'all if you're not familiar with Wright Street, just drive, when if y'all are familiar on the east side by the Madison College, they're right there. They're like the parking lot over. You can see the building, you can see them from each other. So it's really, really close proximity to that. So if y'all are trying to picture in your head where that is, and again, it's walking distance to Carbon 4 too. So and most of our craft beer drinkers know where Carbon 4 is. So if you know where Carbon 4 is, you know where Alt is. So on that note, thanks, Trevor. Let's check in with you soon, because I didn't even get to my questions about where you see gluten-free going and all that. We'll save that for the last moment, the next time. But thanks again for joining us and giving us a little bit of or a really good insight. Sorry, not a little bit, good insight on the whole gluten-free wing of our craft beer industry.
Well, yeah, thanks, Greg. Appreciate the time.
Cheers.
Have a good one. Bye.